What translation do you read out of?
I'm out of NIV.
NIV? Okay.
All right. So, for tonight's message, we're talking about the last two of the redemptive gifts that we're going to be go over. And we're pretty well near the end of this series. But tonight specifically, we're talking about generosity and about encouragement.
Encouragement,
So-
and what was it on?
Generosity.
Generosity.
So, going back to Romans 12, where Paul lists out what we refer to as the redemptive gifts. Starting in verse 6, he says, we have different gifts according to the grace given us. If a man's gift is prophesying, let him use it in proportion to his faith. If it is serving, let him serve. If it is teaching, let him teach. If it is encouraging, let him encourage. If it is contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. If it is leadership, let him govern diligently. If it is showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. See, the thing is as we've been talking about, there's this thing with these gifts, where, as in terms of spiritual gifts, they're not like, healing or tongues. You're not acting as a vessel per se. It's not the Holy Spirit doing something through you, but it is something where the Holy Spirit has changed you, and as a result of that change, you do the thing. So, and that action is the gift. The fact that that's a part of you now, it's like downloading new software into your computer. Suddenly your computer is able to do something, or an app on your phone. Suddenly your phone is able to do this new thing. It's kind of the way that these redemptive gifts work. They're all spiritual gifts, and they're all things that they're not personality traits, but they are action-oriented adjustments in a person. And in the case of this, what Paul's saying, there are two things to look at. When he says, if it is encouraging, let him encourage. If it is contributing to the needs of others, let him give generously. These, like all the gifts, these two things they're things where Paul's effectively saying, just let them do it. They've been gifted with these things. If this is who they are, if this is what God has given them to do, let them do what God has given them to do. And the thing with encouraging and generosity is that the reason why we're talking about them together tonight is because there are no two gifts out of this collection of gifts that are more consistently attacked and more consistently shut down in the church and in humanity in general than these two things. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but to talk about each of them just a little bit, we'll start talking about generosity and the gift of generosity. And again, like I've said with the other redemptive gifts, these are not things that you learn to do per se. They're things that God puts in you, like any gift. God imparts a portion of Him into you through His Spirit. The reality is that the things that really motivate these two gifts are love, mercy, gentleness. These things are and patience. This kind of thing where the compassion that's given to us by the Holy Spirit is what motivates us and drives us forward to be generous, to be encouraging. That's the heart, where the heart has changed, and that's where God's done the things that need to happen inside of us in order to move us forward. But see, a lot of the time we don't do that. Like, one thing is like we won't be praying to receive the gifts of generosity and encouragement tonight. because every single person in this room already has those gifts. Like, when God was talking to me about this message and what to pray for, what we're going to end up praying for is the freedom to be willing to do them and to act in them. The courage to being able and willing to act in them. Because we have already got them. And like the truth is, for the people in the rest of the group that aren't here tonight and that'll end up watching it off the Facebook page and so on, they have them too. God has never been stingy about giving these two gifts. So to kind of like frame this, let's talk about generosity a little bit. Specifically, contributing to the needs of others. I think that's a really good way to put it, because it kind of pulls it out. Instead of putting a word to it, and whatever issues come with that word, this translation kind of pulls it out and says this is what it is. Because it takes it away from being, a lot of us have a box for generosity. Like the kind of, we've talked about pretenses and the way that they can put us in this place. In fact, when we actually talked about redemptive gifts as a whole, we talked about the way that the big struggle that we run into as far as even being able to receive the redemptive gifts is that a lot of times they run into this thing inside of us that says, oh, I know what that is. And we talked about hardened hearts and hardened minds. Well, in terms of generosity, when we hear that word, a lot of us, especially in church, a lot of that comes with stigma. So to pull it apart and say contributing to the needs of others, we have to look at it in terms of, okay, it's not about money, because that therein lies kind of our stigma. A lot of generosity in the church revolves around giving money, giving tithes. And that's the way the world sees us. That's the way that a lot of Christians see it. It's a dynamic created by a lot of false doctrines. And it's not even false doctrine. It's actually a little more than that. There's this element of human psychology. We were actually just watching a video about it. But it's the way that our minds get stuck on negatives. See, they did this experiment where effectively what happened was they took two groups of people, and what they did was they told one group one thing and they told the other group the other thing, and the things that they told them were effectively, okay, we're going to give you this much stuff. And the other one, they told them, we're going to give you this much stuff, but here's a drawback. Well, the funny thing about it is with the group that was just told the good stuff, they went with it, they accepted it. But the ones told the drawback, they would not take it. So then they pulled the groups back in and told them something else. They told them, okay, they told the group who had the drawback, we're going to give you, they focused on the good stuff, but they wouldn't let go of the bad thing. And as a result, they were still unwilling. And they took the other group, the one that had been just told the good things, and just told them and added in the bad thing. And as a result of that, they changed their minds from being willing to receive, and they just were like, okay, well, actually, no. They did the same thing with politicians. They pulled the groups together and talked about this political figure. One of them, they focused on all the good stuff. Another one, they mentioned a bad thing and then the good stuff. And the thing of it is that it was the same result. See, there's this thing in our heads where whenever we meet a negative or a consequence, a punishment, whatever kind of thing it is, there's this basic element of us that stands and says, okay, I don't like that, I don't want that. So as a result of this, a lot of people, when they hear about generosity, have been very burned by people by the church or bad churches taking advantage of people and using generosity as a tool to effectively guilt trip people into giving money to their cause. I've been to those churches, so like I always have a hard time talking about money in any group or like generosity in and of itself because of the stigma that's there. But that's something that God has had to work on with me to mature me out of and heal me of the wounds there caused by watching people do that, twisting scriptures in order to push their agenda. So when we pull it out and look at it in terms of contributing to the needs of others, we get around that stigma a little bit. And obviously I'm not saying that we should only use it that way, but for purposes of tonight, I'm still going to use the word generosity all over the place, but we're talking about contributing to the needs of others. Because that is very, very open-ended. See, Paul isn't talking about if you can give money, then give money generously. That's included, but that's not the whole of it. Because there are a lot of other resources in our lives, in our existence, that can be given generously. Things like our time. Time is probably one of the most significant things that we can give. Because the truth is that in every human being we crave community, and every community requires time among individuals. And there's something about that where you show up, you be there with the people involved, and you be yourself, you share what God has with you. The truth is that the biggest thing that we can share, even beyond our time, is ourselves. And what God has done with us and has given us, and who He is to us. Because the thing of it is that we don't realize this in a lot of cases, is seeing the value of ourselves. You know, we've spent a lot of time in this group talking about identity and the value of our identities. I don't know how many times exactly the words have been shared. God values you because He sees something immaculate inside of you. And it's a part of Him that exists there. And He's always just pushing for us and pushing for us and pushing for us to see it and to live in it. But see, that's the thing of it, is that this is going to sound weird, but I'll unpack it a little bit. See, when we, as followers of Jesus, who have been saved and have the Holy Spirit as part of our being, when we go out and involve ourselves with other people, we are sharing God with them. When we talked about offices, we talked about the different offices and how they work, and how each person has an office, and it's a part of God that He has put into them since birth. It's been there since they were knit together in the womb. Well, when we go out and we share that portion. If you're a shepherd, you're going out and being a shepherd to people, taking care of them in whatever way they need. If you're an evangelist, you're gathering people, sharing words, sharing the gospel, speaking. You know, and those are just two examples. But it still comes down to this thing where we have to see the value of ourselves and what that means, because there's no greater thing to share and be generous with. There's nothing greater to be generous with. So our person, our time, that's better than money, that's better than gifts, that's better than food in some cases. But there's a lot more to generosity than even that. Like, the truth is, it really is just looking to the needs of those around you, or those who God puts in front of you, and being willing and able to give to what they need. Being able and willing to give what it is that God has given you. And there's a heart posture there. Because again, it comes back, it's not even about seeing, okay, because any of us can look back and say, okay, this person with this like ragged shirt and, you know, no clothes and whatever, they need a new shirt. They need new clothing. Any of us can see that, and any of us can act on that observation. But see where it's different with the gift of it is that it comes out of a heart of wanting the best for those around you. Again, it comes out of that gentleness, that patience, that compassion. And even that place where we're talking about giving ourselves. Giving yourself to another person is a scary endeavor. because you run a minefield of different risks and threats and so on. You risk embarrassment, you risk failure, you risk rejection, you risk abandonment, you risk betrayal one day, you risk all kinds of things when you pour yourself out to the people around you, the people that God has put in your life. And that's a scary endeavor. It can be anyways. And the thing of it is that, there's a place for us to have God with us in those particular adventures. But there's also a place where if our hearts have changed, we're motivated by the love and compassion that we have on those people. We can be patient as they push us away. And we can continue to give generously because we see the value in them. We feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, it's funny because with these giftings, a lot of it's almost automatic sometimes. You just have this feeling. You have this thing where you see it and you just give. You need to. You want to. It's not about any other reason. It's just that, I need this. Okay, have it.
That desire, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's where it's different from learning to do this or choosing to do this. And that's not to say that we can't, even with that gift, we can't be stifled. Because like I said, everybody in this room has this gift. And not everybody in this room realizes it. In fact, there are a lot of people in this room who maybe are much more adept at saying no to that gift and squelching it. And there are reasons for that, which we'll talk about in the final portion of this message, because it revolves around what we're supposed to be praying about tonight. But the thing of it is that there's this place for us to be transformed by the love of God and to be motivated by the love of God, and also not only be transformed in the sense that our hearts change, but also the way that we see things. To stop seeing the world as, what this monstrous place, but instead to see this world as a place that needs help. Let's see if I can remember the passage, but I think it's Matthew 9. Matthew or Mark. There it is. Matthew 9:35. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his field," or into his harvest field. I want you guys to meditate on this statement for a moment. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Matthew 9, starting in verse 35. I want you guys to just meditate on those words for a moment. Fill your mind with that and what emotional reaction that evokes. Because from that heart is where generosity springs from. Jesus was generous with everything that he was doing because that's how he saw us. He looked around the world and he saw people that were doing things. You know what happens when you scare a herd of animals? We'll say sheep because he used sheep, but you can watch it on the Discovery Channel. You can pull up a video of a herd of buffalo, zebra, wildebeest, whatever, being terrified by the predatory animals that hunt them. Lions, wolves, Cape hunting dogs. See, predatory animals like that hunt large herbivores, they prey on the survival reactions of the creatures. See, lions specifically, we'll look at them. The lionesses set up like one ambush after another. What they'll do is one lioness will set up way over here, another lioness will set up way over here, another one way over here. And all of them with the herd of, we'll say wildebeest as our example, right in here. Then a couple of lionesses, or a few of them, will come and chase the herd. And they'll try to surround them as much as they can, but they always push them towards those ones waiting in ambush. And when the herd is running, like the herd is scared, they run from the lionesses because they're dangerous and they're trying to kill them. If you look at a wildebeest, it's not a big enough animal to itself take on 3 lionesses at one time. So when they get scared, they break for it. And then the ambush happens. And it's one after another, after another, after another, and all of that is intended to scatter the herd. Because once they start scattering, they stop thinking about the group. They stop thinking about how to handle this attack. They don't reason and say, okay, we need to create a defensive formation. They don't reason and say, oh, we need to stand strong. They don't reason and say, we're being ambushed. What they do is they panic and they react. And that is what the lions work on. Their whole plan, the whole reason why they do what they do, is in order to cause that panic so they can pick off one individual and kill them and eat them. And this is the way that life is for Christians. Like, Jesus sees that in us. He saw that in us. And that's why he had compassion, because he saw that we weren't evil in the sense that we looked at life around us and said, oh, I want to be a monster. He saw that what we were doing was reacting to the attacks of the enemy. They were harassed and helpless. Because alone, we're not strong compared to demons. Like, if we're without God, we're just getting rickrolled by them over and over again. And as they do their things and act on us, they pressure us into places of fear. And we panic and we start reacting. And we are manipulated by them every step of the way.
Well, I tell you what, I'll drive down.
And that's why, and that halts our generosity. It mitigates our ability to be anything there. And it robs us of being able to have that heart that Jesus shares right there.
Okay, well, do you have the number?
The harvest, the workers are few because they're too busy running from the things that scare them.
If they say it's not, he said, that's what they told you. But he said that the lady typed
So,
it in several times.
it's from that heart that Jesus has that generosity springs from. It's that level of compassion that we are able to share in when we start seeing the world and the people around us as sheep,
I don't know.
helpless, harassed. I mean,
The trouble is.
I want you to think about a sheep, for example, and look at the number of armaments that a sheep has as an animal defending itself from dangerous predators.
Can you try your
If you pit a ram, even the strongest ram, against a weak lion, the ram's going to lose. It's going to get its throat clamped down on, and it's going to get suffocated until it dies. And then the lion's going to eat it. There's a reason why the Bible uses animals to depict us. We can observe animals. We can see what they look like. We get really caught up in ourselves and what we're able to do. Like, we think of ourselves as gods in a lot of ways. We're the judges, we're the this, we're the that. We have the power. All the while, God doesn't see us that way. He'll make us in many ways, but on our own, we are helpless and defenseless.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, hon, I mean, I'm gonna say,
And that's where we need him.
okay.
But it's where he wants to transform our hearts to be more like him.
Doesn't sound like you're close to anything.
So as we see other people that way and recognize us as Christians being empowered by God, we can look
Yeah, why don't
around
you
and
have
see
the fresh water and the gray water,
that our hearts need to be changed
and that.
and that the world around us'
and then go
hearts
in
need to
and
be
try get some
changed.
help at least
And there's a
start
place to
in
become
these
those
areas.
shepherds, that, as opposed to being another one of the sheep. So, talking about encouragement, because that is kind of the next thing here. And similarly, like generosity, encouragement comes out of a very similar heart. See, the thing of it is that encouragement is something that you can give. It's something that you could even be generous with. But the other side about encouragement is that you're inciting people to move forward. It's not just providing for their needs per se, but it's providing for a basic need that all of us have, and that is for encouragement. The truth of the matter is that when we're alone by ourselves, or when we're alone,
Only sometimes it's by ourselves, though.
when,
Sometimes.
when we're alone,
All the times our friends make us feel alone.
we, truth, when we're alone, we are constantly in places that where we're left without any other kind of any other kinds of insights into our own person.
Mhm.
See, the trouble with loneliness and solitude specifically is that we have no outside input other than our own. And the thing about it is that, number one, as followers of Jesus, that leaves us really open to attacks from the enemy. See, that whole thing, that whole analogy about lions and wildebeest, that's life, okay? Just being real about it. We're constantly being pushed and attacked by the enemy, and those manipulations are always there. See, just as the lions manipulate the herd to move down that path where they've got the ambushes in set, the demons move us in those ways. And then they hit us with different things. And it's not even always attacks per se. Like, it's not always a demon waiting in line to, like, ambush you. Sometimes it's just a situation, a consequence, a circumstance of life. Sometimes they use things that they didn't even plan.
Yeah, your vulnerability.
They just saw the vulnerability and they just saw something to hit you with.
Because they're watching us, you know.
Exactly. It's kind of like, they say that hunters back in the olden days used to kill mammoth by chasing them off cliffs. They would scare the woolly mammoths with torches and spears, and they'd basically push them get them to walk off of a cliff, because they weren't thinking. Again, it's that same thing where they panic and react.
Mammoths are huge, dang.
Well, yeah, they couldn't spear them to death, so they had to come up with something new.
That's genius.
It's like we were talking about with Skyrim, leveling up fast by blowing giants off the cliff with
Yeah.
the leveled up Fusro Da. It's this whole thing where, like, they figured out a plan, and it's the same with us. Sometimes they'll just use the environment that we're in to work against us.
Mhm.
And the thing about that is, with all that manipulation, all that effort being poured in to tear you down, if you are alone, like, number one, I should specify this because as followers of Jesus, we always have God, right? We're never alone. Well, what's the first attack? It's always going to get you to believe that you're alone and that God doesn't care about you.
Mhm.
Like I talked about with the spiritual warfare series, there are two things that demons go after all the time: your view of God and your view of yourself. They will always attack those two things over and over and over again. And if they're not attacking one, they're attacking the other. And they'll use them to work against each other even. Oh, look at how terrible you are. You committed this sin. Look at that. You know what? You've just failed God. You're such a failure. I can't believe that you even go to God now. You should be ashamed of yourself. You can't pray to him. He's better than you.
Listen to your voice right now. It's so funny.
Yeah. But this is the thing that we run through all the time, is that they're constantly attacking these things. So once they've got you running with that, God doesn't care about you, as they try to convince you. It gets a little harder to hear him and to believe in him. And as you're running now with that belief, they can put all kinds of things in front of you. And then you find yourself asking God, why did this thing happen? And then suddenly the evidence starts to mount, and the belief starts to grow that he doesn't care about you, and maybe you're not worthy, and all these different things. And this is what we go through, like the truth of it. And if we're alone, when we're left alone and we don't have any outside influences, any community to help build us up, we're just left with that. And yeah, like God can break through and he'll work us out of that mindset and all these things, but in the meantime, we're still there. And even then, a lot of the time, we have to be able to receive that. How many times, when you think back to times that you've struggled with your own belief in God, like that he values you, that he's there for you, how many times when you look back after you finally get it, and he gets through to you, and you realize, okay, he does actually care about me. When you look back on it, how many times in that span did he try to show you, but you just couldn't see it? That's the thing, is like we panic and react. And that's where it helps to have a community. Because if those wildebeest ran into a bigger group of wildebeest, and those wildebeest were not panicked by the lions because they outnumbered them 10-1, and were just like, hey, we've got horns, we can just kill you, and then they ganged up on the lions, those ones don't have to panic anymore. And in a lot of ways, that's what our function as a community is intended to be. We're intended to be there to be able to lift each other up, to help each other get out of those mindsets of panicking and running and just doing stuff. We stop, like, if we have people around us, we can stop panicking and running and trampling on each other and getting scared and doing all the things that we do when we're panicked and reacting.
Or even turning on each other with our strengths.
Right.
Because
Exactly.
like if he can get us to turn on each other, it's another way to scatter the herd. If we see each other as like a threat, then we're going to, keep our distance. And what that does is it puts everybody at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody then is alone and doesn't trust the rest of the herd to defend them. And then offense gets in there, and there's a reason that God says, before you come and give me your offering, forgive your brother, make peace with him. It's because unforgiveness and offense makes us vulnerable anyway. Like, it's not just that he doesn't want us to have bitterness in our hearts. It can literally be used as a tool for isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're vulnerable to attack.
Yeah. And so, like with that, there is this place where, again, that motivation of love, patience, those elements of the Holy Spirit, those fruit of the Holy Spirit, the compassion, the gentleness, that's out of that can spring encouragement and the will to encourage, to function in this particular gift.
Yeah. Even courage itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it takes courage sometimes
Yeah.
to stick with the group.
Yeah. So, with that statement about, those things being there, would you read the passages
Sure.
that God gave you?
Yeah. Oops. The first one I'll read is kind of like the hub. It's Hebrews 10:23 through 24. And it just says, "Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good deeds." So we're supposed to actually be stirring one another up. We need to kind of be looking for ways that we can do that,
Yeah.
because that's where we're going to, that's sometimes where God puts the strength for us to draw from him. And then I got a couple passages about watching our words too. Let's see. So 2 Timothy 2:14 through 17.
2 Timothy, what was it?
2:14 through 17. "Charge them before God not to quarrel about words, which does no good, but only ruins the hearers. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth." Because sometimes we can handle the word of truth as a weapon. It depends on our heart. "But avoid irrelevant babble, for it will lead people into more and more ungodliness, and their talk will spread like gangrene." I love that verse.
What translation is that?
actually in that?
It's ESV.
ESV.
Yeah. And then let's see. Ecclesiastes also talks about letting our words be few. It says, "Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil." Sometimes we don't know that we are. We're just running our mouths.
Yeah.
And we don't mean to. "Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes with much business, and a fool's voice with many words." And then the other examples he gave me from the Bible had to do with how, like, he uses people to encourage us sometimes. So in 2 Corinthians 7:6, "But God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus. And not only by his coming, but also by the comfort with which he was comforted by you." So it kind of like showed me the reaction chain that can be there. Like, he used Titus to encourage Paul, but then who encouraged Titus? Well, the entire church. And it passes on. And then the other one, this was kind of cool. This one was about how David used to, like, play the lyre when Saul had a tormenting spirit,
Yeah.
and it would make the spirit leave. And I've always looked at that verse, like, because I'm a worshiper. Like, I've always looked at that and gone, like, isn't that cool, like, the power of worship? But this week, when he showed it to me, he had this part stand out that, like, Saul actually had, the reason David was there was that he had favor on David. That just means he liked him. And that really it was David's presence that mattered. Having David there was really what chased away that tormenting spirit, and that spoke to me about, like, just about how I have a tendency to isolate myself, and how what that can do is really like leave me open to like torment that doesn't even have to be there. Like when all I need to do is invite, you know, a friend in, and the torment goes away.
Oh, 2 or 3 are gathered, Jesus is there.
Yeah, yeah. He's in our midst.
It's kind of funny because I heard radio station, some Christian radio station, and it was not really saying that, but it was just like the being there for that person
Yeah.
was actually all that they needed, and they felt like they needed to say something to him, but they didn't need to.
Yeah.
And so,
Just because it's like the power of presence.
yeah, and it was like a
Which is what our
core thing
hearts are
too.
like.
It's like, can you be here because I feel alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I'll be here.
That's cool. And then I have one more, which just talks about how, like, as a body, we're supposed to aim for restoration. It's 2 Corinthians 13:11. Finally, brothers, rejoice. Aim for restoration. Comfort one another. Agree with one another. And live in peace. And the God of love and peace will be with you. So sometimes the way to get restoration is literally to like do what you can to be in agreement with your brothers and sisters and live at peace with them. There's a special protection in that God meant. He meant for that to happen from the very beginning. Like he said, it's not good for a man to be alone. And there's a lot of reason behind that. He just wanted to design this system. He designed the buddy system. Like, sorry, I'm thinking about Stranger Danger. Well,
Stranger danger.
you know, like, you can get attacked by strangers or spirits or yourself if you're thinking negative thoughts about yourself. It's like sometimes we just need somebody with us that we can, you know, kind of let our self-judgments, how they can stand up against what somebody else says. Like, okay, that's not true and here's why. Then that judgment is getting challenged. Whereas it wouldn't be if we just stayed alone. And then it has time to permeate and spread like gangrene.
A gang of green.
A green gang is the worst gang.
Sounds like from Pokemon.
That's all the verses I had.
That's good.
That was really good. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of spiritual attack around these specific giftings, and which is why it's framed around this whole talk about lions and wildebeests and just different animals. Because see, the thing of it is that when we talk about generosity and encouragement, they both come out of that same heart of just compassion and gentleness, patience and love, and just the way that, and mercy. I mean, like, it takes mercy to be able to sit with people, to continue encouraging them even when they just will spit in your face or disagree with you or fight you about it, to be generous with people who abuse the gifts that you give them. It takes so many of these different things, because it does happen. And sometimes God will call you into places where you're dealing with somebody that's really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And the intention is always for love to be the thing to break through. And that takes time. Sometimes you're the bulldozer mowing down the building through the Holy Spirit. Other times, you're the water dropping on that rock and slowly
Cracking.
cracking it. Yeah.
Well,
And that's through the Holy Spirit. And the thing of it is that there's a place for each of us to be anywhere between those two extremes and then more. And it just depends on who it is and the season that we're in. The problem with it is that, like I said at the beginning, every single person here tonight has these two gifts. We don't need to pray for those, but instead, there is something that we need to talk about because of the attack that's against these two things. See, the reason why we don't do them as much, how often when you feel like you should encourage somebody, when you see something wrong and you feel that need to encourage them. And encouragement, just to clarify something I didn't talk about earlier, is that, encouragement is a lot broader as well. It's not always just saying nice things, like some people do get caught up in that it's just this, but it is building people up. Sometimes it's critical in the sense that we're speaking about the truth of where they're at, and it is encouraging them to be more. And that's the thing, is like you can see that somebody has a sin and say, this is your sin, but it's destroying you. Look at who you actually are. You're not a douchebag.
He just quoted me.
He did, yeah. The thing of it is that sometimes that's what encouragement looks like.
Yeah.
But the thing of it is what stops us from saying those things, from being there in the ways that we know we need to be, or to be generous. What stops us from giving ourselves especially? There's a reason why I frame it around that particular element and not about just giving to needs. What is it that stops us from giving these two things? Well, it's fear. The biggest thing that halts us in our steps, the part that will make us say to God or to the Holy Spirit that's pushing us, no, I can't do that, is because of the things that we have been conditioned to believe. Give yourself here. I can't do that. I'm too stressed. I'm too much this. I'm not good enough. Share this word of encouragement. I can't do that. They're obviously not going to listen to me. See, one of the big things to talk about tonight, and even what we'll end up praying about, is about assignments. Because there's an assignment of the enemy against every single one of us. Every human being has an assignment that the enemy would see fit to push forward. Again, it revolves around those two things, like always, in order to get you to not believe in God or not believe in yourself. But if we were to think back to the message on spiritual warfare and how we talked about familiar spirits, these are the demons that linger with us, almost like a bad version of a guardian angel. But they're the ones that linger on us and our families. They're usually behind what we refer to as generational curses. The kind of thing where it's like, your father had a temper and then you have a temper too, and you find that your grandfather had a temper, or a drinking problem, or issues with lust, or different things like that, or lying. My family is a family of drunkards and liars. I'm a drunkard and a liar. It's what we do. There's an element of assignment to that. Because what happens is these familiar spirits exist with us and linger with us and move with us, and we don't even recognize them. Like, that's the whole game plan, is to acclimatize you to sin, to mentalities that hold you in sin, that lock you down and make you not believe. It puts us in places where we always find ourselves saying, well, that's the way it is.
As
And
we grew up with our world being introduced to us,
exactly.
as such, whatever the assignment was on our parents,
Yeah.
that's following us now, like fear.
Yeah. And so we have this thing where like God tells us about what real life is supposed to be like. But we can't believe it a lot of the time because we've been conditioned to believe a certain thing. God says you have value. Well, I've been raised to believe that I don't. You know, my parents have proven it to me by not being there for me or by not caring or by punishing me over the smallest little infractions. They've shown me that I'm not meaningful. Well, you come to find that your dad went through the same thing, or your mom, you know, one of them. And it's just this consistent thing. And it seems foreign to, and what's worse is we can justify it by saying, okay, well, I can't talk about myself in that light. I can't view myself as being valuable because that's arrogant, or that's selfish, or that's self-righteous, or that's judgy, all these different things. Whatever the enemy can use to justify this conditioning that we've been brought up under, he will use. They will use. Demons don't care about us. They don't. All that they care and are about and are motivated by is our destruction. And whatever it takes to keep us from being who God has made us to be. What is more destructive than a shepherd that hates people?
Or sheep.
Well,
A shepherd that hates sheep.
whatever.
Yeah.
I was talking about The Office. Like, it is what it is. What's more destructive than a teacher that hates their students?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've seen
we've
that
done that.
in schools. It's weird.
Like, it's all this stuff. What's more destructive than a prophet that doesn't like God?
Yeah.
Speaking blasphemy, and also it says those who are blind lead those into traps as well. So if they're blind,
Yeah.
then the other people.
And that's the thing, is like, what we run into is that Satan and his buddies, they don't want us to be anything other than these particular things, because if you're that, you'll destroy. You'll put yourself in places where you'll stand in front of a church and then destroy it. You'll stand in front of a group of people and you'll destroy them.
And yourself.
Mm-hmm. And that's the point, is to continue to cause more panic, more chaos, more destruction. That's all they want. They don't care about you. They're not speaking truth to you. They might speak little truths, all to make you believe in a lie. Because that's how they work.
The only power they have is the lie you believe.
Right. And therein lies that thing where we have to acknowledge what the truth is. And this is where we talk about assignments. Because there is an immense assignment, not only against each of us, but against these particular gifts. What is more evangelistic than giving and encouraging? Than being generous with yourself and encouraging those who need encouragement? If you're giving to people, giving yourself to people and encouraging them. Okay, let's just look at this as an example. You're going to people who are hurt and lost and in pain, who are suffering. Well, and the enemy's working to make them hopeless. And suddenly you're showing up, being everything that God has made you to be. And you're encouraging them to not give up hope. Sharing the words that you've been given or what you see or whatever, in order to help them understand that there's plenty of hope, that there's life in Jesus. And they start believing in that. Well, that permeates that darkness, and suddenly the light's being seen. And then they're encouraged, they're feeling better, and they're able to move and go and do the same. It's like Heather was talking about with what Paul was saying about that whole thing where Titus came and encouraged Paul after being encouraged by the church. There is this chain reaction that can happen, but it requires a catalyst. And that's the thing, is the enemy will fight tooth and nail to stop you from ever being that. So not only are there the daily attacks, but there's the stuff that they put in place when we're kids. And these assignments will always hold us in places. And to be specific about assignments, because these two gifts are detrimental to to the kingdoms of darkness. You can't they can't exist where there's light. So they have to try to do as much as they can to snuff that out, or put that under the lamp, or under the pot, I think was the term.
Oh, they got a lot of ours here.
So all of that in order to keep people away from being what they're supposed to be,
Oh, I don't know where Chris and them are.
so that they can continue building their own kingdom.
Maybe they might answer you.
So here's what they'll do. They'll get you to believe that you're not good enough. They'll get you to believe that people are always going to betray you. They'll like set up this whole thing where, you know, they'll use people around you, or draw you to people, or draw people to you who are going to hurt you and betray you.
Yeah.
Those kinds of people that are very much so reacting. And they know they're reacting. Like, they know because they're doing it. They're making it happen. It's just like, hey, we've got this one all puppety with our strings and whatnot. That person's scary. Over here you go. You're their friend now. Oh, look, now you're their friend. Hurt them.
Exactly.
Do it. It's this thing that they do all the time. And then they'll, after they've sent that person, they'll come back to you and just be like, see, look, all people are like that. You can never have any hope of a future with anybody. You can't have community because that's the way people are.
Or Christians. All Christians are like that. Oh,
Mhm.
they're just this and that because they have a bad experience.
Yeah.
Exactly. Everything that they can, they will use in order to create a false reality.
Yeah.
And that goes back to that thing that we were talking about, that I was talking about at the beginning, about the way our minds work, and about how we can oftentimes get stuck on negative experiences. It's just like, you think about like our current climate, and the way that the way that Twitter is used. You know, we have so many celebrities and so on who come up, and even if they're really good people, like right now, this guy is doing fantastic works to try to save the world. But, you know, back when he was like 16, he posted this thing about that was totally like pro-Nazi. And as a result of that, everybody's mind shifts to that and says that person's terrible.
Is that actually a real thing?
Kinda, yeah.
I've heard of stories like that.
There are a lot of stories like that out there, but not quite to this example.
About the negativity, my favorite proverb is Proverbs 15:15. If you constantly think everything's negative, you'll just be thinking negative. But if you think everything's like, oh, everything's awesome, life is awesome, you're gonna feel awesome, basically, like in a sense. Like,
Yeah.
just how, you know, if you keep meditating on negative, life's just gonna be horrible.
Yeah. So it's this thing that we run into where it's this really easy thing to manipulate in us. See, sometimes it's important for us to take a look at what we're grateful for in order to realize, oh hey, yeah, there's actually more good than bad in our lives. But we don't do that because a lot of the time, you know, when we get struck down by things like depression, we can't. We're just stuck in that place of darkness. Sometimes we get spirits on us that hold us there. And those are things that have to be prayed off, you know, pointing back to the message on healing. Sometimes we need healing in our spirits.
Our souls.
And that's the thing, is like these assignments are real and consistent, and they're engineered to stop us from being who we're supposed to be. And the truth is that, you know, I mentioned this thing about all of us have these two gifts. Well, yet not everybody acts on them. Because we're constantly being pushed into a place, into a corner that says you can't. Your generosity, your ability to contribute to the needs of others is limited to these few things because you can't be more than that. And the demons will keep you there. You can't encourage people because you're bad at this. You're bad at talking to people. You don't care about people. Look at why would you encourage people when they don't deserve it? You know, there are all these different things that we're put into that the enemy crafts masterfully and then manipulates us into. We're those wildebeests. We're those sheep. We're those animals that are running. and they're just manipulating every bit of it. But the thing of it is, it's funny. There's this video out there that shows this young buffalo. It's
Is that a meme?
no,
Okay.
It's in-
something else.
it's an African buffalo, and what happens is it's just a baby. So what its herd gets attacked by lions, and the baby gets separated out, and the lions go after the baby buffalo, and they start to like bring it down, and it just barely manages to escape and go through the water, and it gets grabbed by a crocodile, and then the lions
Oh,
come
I've
from the
seen
other
this.
side, and the lions and the crocodile fight over the little buffalo for a while.
Oh my gosh, that's awful.
Kevin's like, yes.
Finally, the
Gosh, Kevin.
the lions team up and pull the buffalo away from the crocodile, and then they proceed to start to kill it. And then the entire herd for that buffalo shows up
Yes.
and gangs up on the lions.
No. Roll on.
Yeah.
See, there's this whole thing that we run into, and the buffalo lives throughout all of this.
Oh my gosh.
Kevin says no.
And the reason why I bring up this video is because there's a reality here that we need to start living in. Because see, too often we feel like that little buffalo, and we're being pulled between evil and evil, destruction and destruction, failure and loss, and all these different things. If we use the crocodile to exemplify the circumstances, and we use the lions to represent the demons, you see a reality where we're being pulled between two things, and we're stuck having to try to survive it.
Yeah.
All we can do is just be ragdolled by both of them as they determine who's going to eat us. But there's a thing for us as a group, or as individuals even, to be like those buffalo who show up to save the day. Because that's how God engineered this. We should be protecting each other. We should be showing up on behalf of each other as much as we can be.
Praying for each other, yeah.
Praying for each other. But also being these things, like encourage, contribute. It's more than just that. If God has made you and put it on your heart to be that person, go be that person and do it fearlessly. Because that's the only way that we break this pattern. It's only when the wildebeests realize that they need to gather up and defend themselves that they thwart the lion's attacks, or their whole manipulative plan. So the funny thing about this is the reason why we talk about assignments tonight, and the reason why we've been spending so much time talking about spiritual warfare relating to these two gifts specifically, is because these gifts are the answer to the attacks of the enemy in so many ways. They're, in many ways, the tools for helping overcome that. But the enemy, knowing that, has decided to try to stop us from having those. It's kind of like so obscure random example that comes to mind is there was this old empire back in the day called the Byzantine Empire. It was the eastern half of Rome that survived Rome and kept going for another 1,000 years. Every summer, like every season, they would be attacked by everybody. The entire history of this nation is them barely surviving because their city was one of the most fortified in the world, and the Arabs came from one side, the Vikings came from another side, Hungarian horsemen came from another side. They were always under attack, and they were fighting with each other all the time too. So they were constantly at war from outside and from within. And one time, they decided they didn't feel like being attacked. So they didn't sell weapons to the Hungarian horsemen. See, they were fueling the mechanisms for their own destruction.
Oh my god, that sucks.
They were constantly selling weapons and things like that to the people, to the groups around them, And one time they were like, you know what? We don't feel like dealing with this. You don't get weapons. You know what happened that year? They didn't get attacked by the Hungarian horsemen. See, we need to stop giving the enemy the means to destroy us.
Yeah.
And we need to start being the means to destroy him. And this is the thing where these assignments are going to be an important thing. And we're going to pray about these tonight for each of us and where the enemy has created assignments on us. Because in a lot of ways, these are so subtle, we don't even recognize that they're on us. Like, we don't sit there and think, oh, I know that this is my thing. Because a lot of the time it's so subtle. And maybe a lot of us have been made aware over the last week or so. But some of us haven't. So we need to be able to be free to go function as in these gifts as God has made us to. Do you understand?
Mhm.
So that's where we're going to go with this. I don't remember the verse off the top of my head, but I remember what it says. And I believe it's Paul who talks about, or it's James, who talks about if you struggle against Satan, he will flee from you.
To God resist the devil and he'll flee from, is James.
It's James? Yeah. We need to start struggling, and we need to start resisting. Assignments and familiar spirits create in us a chink in our armor that makes us unable to resist, because it's what we view as normal. So we need freedom from that.